What is up, and welcome to the Dynasty League Football YouTube channel, a very special Ask Me Anything AMA with the officially unofficial doctor of fantasy football Twitter. You may know him as Jim Thrive, but his real name is Jeff Mueller? Mueller. Yep. Like Bueller, right? Yeah.
Like
Jeff, I always want to say, is it Mueller or Mueller? But it's Mueller. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Yeah, just keeping busy with the injury front and work picking up. So, yeah, it's good. How about you?
Yeah, doing well, man. So we are here. This is one of 3 shows that we're doing that are going to be live right here on the channel this week. So tonight we're mostly focused on injuries, but Jeff's smart about a lot of things too. So if you have questions that you want Jeff to answer, it can be about anything, whatever. TV shows. What's the most random thing you're an expert on that people will be surprised about, Jeff?
Oh, man.
Hats. I don't know. Jeff is smart about everything. So ask him any question. And then tomorrow we're doing a mailbag show. It's me and Tyler, and that's literally like ask us anything at all. And we're just taking dynasty questions, startup, rookie, trades, whatever. And then Thursday, I'm really excited. Jeff Bell is going to be on. We're going to be doing AMA with him. That's going to be a lot of Devy talk. He gets really into the Devy world with college athletes, things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk with him, and he's a blast. We're going to follow him on Twitter and all that too. But tonight, we've got Jeff, and injuries are a very important part of dissecting and understanding the dynasty world. There's a lot of different things we need to understand. We need to understand coaching. We need to understand philosophies. We need to understand talent. We need to understand all these different things. Injuries are definitely a part of it, and that's why I wanted Jeff to come on today. So Jeff, just in general, broad question, how much does your knowledge of injuries impact what you do as a dynasty owner?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with saying sometimes it impacts me too much, where I have the information right in front of me. Obviously, as much information as possible, using my knowledge base and all that. We're not in the buildings with the players, but sometimes we do, unfortunately, fade really good players who happen to end up playing a full season. But I try to avoid those mistakes. I faded Melvin Gordon in his big monster year. But it can definitely save you from drafting or holding a player who carries significant injury risk. So it gets you out of that risk early.
Yeah, and so is that kind of a sort of a taking an approach of like, I don't want to take on a lot of risk, or is it, do you find yourself like when you understand the injuries more, you just at least understand the risk that you're taking because they're all risky, right? Like you're playing a pretty violent game.
Yeah, exactly. I think Dr. Edwin Porras said it the best. All of these players are, he didn't say prone to injury, but all of them can get injured. It's a violent game. So I think a very small percentage of players actually don't get injured during the year. But yeah, when you know the risk of a re-injury of a certain injury or a player who's coming back from a certain injury, you can avoid a lot of that risk. And really, it depends. As a dynasty player, it really depends on how risk averse you are or how much risk you are willing to take on.
Yeah. So if you're listening right now, you're joining us, you're viewing this, we invite you to any comments that you have, go ahead and get them in the chat. We got a bunch from Twitter, like a ton that we can talk about. We've also got a recent article from Jeff that we're going to get into. But if you've got a player on your team you're nervous about, you want some good news, or you just want the truth, the whole cold hard truth from Jeff, ask us. And yeah, we'll get the expert here, DLF's injury expert, Jeff Mueller, to help us out. So the first person that I thought of as an LSU homer, and the first question we got in the chat had to do with Joe Burrow. So, Jeff, you've been on this actually since early on. Very early, one of the first people I heard talk about this. Is Joe Burrow going to play in week 1?
I fully believe so. And I will say, I try not to toot my own horn, but myself and Dr. David Chow, I believe, were the only ones saying back in, before he even had his surgery on December 2nd, that he would have a good chance of starting week 1. Pretty much everyone else said likely pup. But yeah, with his injury, I mean, he's killed it in his rehab. I've seen some videos of his movement. Obviously, you'll hear coach speak, but there are several indicators that he'll be ready to go.
That's definitely good to hear. And so when you say he's going to be good to go for week 1, and you're thinking about him, like, is that 100%? Like, you think he is going to be at full capital letters Joe Burrow, able to, have 3 targets that he's getting 100, 3 weapons that he's getting 100 targets for? Like, what level of version of Joe Burrow are you expecting?
Right. So that's a great question and clarifying question. I think it'll be likely around mid-season when he hits his ceiling as a potential quarterback 1. He likely starts out slow. I want to say I was looking at their schedule, and I anticipate a lot of runs. They're probably going to use the heck out of Joe Mixon in the first couple weeks, and probably Samaje Perine just to offload Mixon. But I anticipate quick throws. I don't anticipate a lot of rushing upside for Burrow in fantasy. So if you're in a 1-quarterback league, I'd be planning to have a quarterback to play the first couple weeks just for a total ceiling play. If you're in 2-quarterback leagues, I think Burrow will be fine as your quarterback 2. I wouldn't necessarily want him as my top quarterback as a contender right now just to start the season. But mid-season, typically coming back from these ACL tears and MCL tears, he'll likely be a little rusty just starting out.
Gotcha. I also noticed in your article, one of the people that you mentioned is a weapon of his, and that's T. Higgins. So what can you tell us about where T. Higgins is and what's going in, and what should we be looking for to know that everything's okay with him?
Yeah, so not a lot of people remember. It was week 17. He took a pass and was running after the catch, and he collapsed on the field with a significant hamstring strain. And not a lot of people know his hamstring history. He's had, I believe, 6 or 7 different isolated hamstring strains throughout his career since what I could find 2017. So I'm watching that closely. He obviously, I don't believe Chase limits his upside. The Bengals are going to pass 40, 45 times a game, and their defense stinks anyways. So I think Higgins, as long as he can stay healthy, he'll have that upside. Just know, there is some risk there with the hamstring strains, and just watch for that. I'm watching for any hamstring complications during camp, in the off season, as they lead up to week 1, and then obviously during the season too.
You're right. It's really interesting. I don't think many people think about him as somebody who had an injury or struggled with an injury at the end of last season. I don't know if we just checked out or whatever. Is there anybody else like that comes to mind that like you don't hear a lot of people talking about, that you just think like, yeah, I need people to be aware, like we at least need to be looking at this person?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article that I'm not sure when it'll come out on DLF, probably within the next week or so. But most people, if you've had leagues where you're kind of out of it, if you didn't make playoffs or you lose in round 1, you kind of check out after week 14, 15, if you're mostly focused on fantasy. So I did an article talking about certain players who got injured late, week 16, 17, and then had surgeries in the off season. A couple guys in there, Amari Cooper, Zach Moss, they both had surgeries. Cooper's was it was more of a cleanup, just an arthroscopic cleanup. So I'm not concerned on him, but Zach Moss, he had a significant high ankle sprain that limited him late in the season, and he actually had a tightrope surgery. Typically, the return to play is pretty good, but he's had a pretty long history with injuries dating back into college. So multiple hand fractures. He's already had a scope on his right knee, and then this tightrope surgery. So I'm personally fading selling Zach Moss if anyone's even buying at this point.
That's kind of interesting because I do think, there was a little bit of buzz because the Bills did not draft a running back. So it's like, oh, okay, that means these guys get another shot. And it is true, like not having to overcome a rookie, that is good for him. But obviously this injury, like you said, this extensive injury history. Is that kind of what you look at when you say, like, this guy is just continuing to add up, just hit after hit after hit? Like, is there a breaking point at some point, or like it's just like you don't like seeing a long list, like a laundry list of what they've had done?
Yeah, you don't like seeing a long laundry list. The great thing, if you're looking at your roster, if you have a player who has an extensive injury history, but actually has high draft capital, and from what I've seen, round 1 to round 3 typically is a hitting point where if that player is continuously injured, teams typically stick with that player longer and give them a longer leash to rehab, to get healthy, to train. You know, the training in college is way different than training in the NFL. So they're typically given a longer leash. But once you hit like round 4, 5, say, the later rounds, if that player gets injured, there's a risk of them just losing their spot and the team moving on because they're on such a cheap contract. And there was minimal investment into them.
So, man, 2 players jump to mind when you say that. One, Preston Williams, undrafted free agent, struggled with injuries his first 2 years. And even though he looked good, Miami was like, we got to address this position. And they brought in Will Fuller and they brought in Jalen Waddle. And, but a guy that maybe had first round capital, we might be thinking like, oh, look, Tua's going to have Parker and Williams. And, you're thinking about all that. But the fact that he had that injury, that hampers the amount of chances he's going to get, is what you're saying.
I believe so. Yeah. He was round 7 or UDF?
I think he's undrafted.
Undrafted.
Pretty sure he was undrafted.
Yeah, and you look at the moves. Your best. What's the phrase? You probably know this the best. The best opportunity is availability or something like that. Right?
Yeah, the best ability is availability. Yeah.
And he hasn't shown that. So what is Miami going to do, and what have they already done? Is they've started. Get out of here! Or my dog's trying to eat my dinner. They've already started to make some moves to in a way move on. Now Will Fuller's on 1 year. They drafted Jalen Waddle. He's going to stick, obviously. So you never know with Waddle, but I just don't see it with Preston Williams long term.
You mentioned your dog there. We got a dog-related question right here on the injury AMA. My dog hurt her paw, limping when it gets stiff. How long will she be out?
Not sure. Put her in the pool, do some aquatic therapy. Yeah.
Need to get some beat reporters on that one. Here's one that I know that you have been asked about before and you've talked about. I don't think he's close to joining this, but he's on the other side. High draft capital for this guy, but the injuries definitely add up for Saquon Barkley. How about him? What's your prognosis on what you think about Saquon? Where do we stand? And, how could this, like, obviously another year with a bunch of injuries could start having people be more hesitant, right?
Yeah. And I mean, if you really want to dig, you can look at the turf complications or the turf risks at MetLife, all of that. Ultimately, I wrote an article on DLF, actually on Saquon. And I was rereading it, and I made a comment. I don't know if Saquon Barkley will be the overall running back 1 again. And I've actually changed my stance on that a little bit because, I'm looking at startup ADP and who, he has age on his side, right? Mm-hmm. You can point to the high ankle sprain, isolated incident. It cost him 2 games, probably should have cost him a third one, but he rushed back. It lingered for 4 weeks or so. And then the ACL tear, and that's kind of it, and he's now, I don't think it's fair to compare his rehab to Adrian Peterson's, but the mentality is similar. And who has been at Saquon's side pretty much this whole time? Adrian Peterson and Adrian Peterson trainers, right? And you see a lot of the videos coming out of him. He looks good, so you look at Dynasty startup ADP, and who are you taking over Saquon? Right? Like I don't necessarily trust CMC to stay healthy under his workload at his size. Mm-hmm. Dalvin Cook, he has his own soft tissue injuries you have to worry about. Alvin Kamara, how is he going to play with? I know you're a Saints fan, but how's he going to play with without Drew Brees?
Right.
Zeke maybe has 1 or 2 more years. He's been inefficient, but he looks like he's lost some weight and gotten his step back. But to be honest, I think Saquon has a good chance. I'm not concerned long term.
Yeah. It's a weird time at running back in Dynasty because, you've got the rookies from last year, and then like basically everybody else outside of Saquon kind of feels like they're ready to move out, right? I mean, like Christian McCaffrey is still a stud, but you're kind of getting to a place where like, yeah, he's getting on up there in age, starting to get there, struggled with injuries last year. But you're not quite ready to anoint an Antonio Gibson or, maybe not even quite DeAndre Swift because of what we're hearing out of Detroit. So there's some hesitancy there, but within the next couple of years, like those are the guys that are going to be at the top of that list.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the ACL, and kind of interesting. I don't know how much you looked at the Adrian Peterson injury when it happened, but I remember the doctors talking about how his knee basically looked like a newborn baby's knee. Like it did not look like there was the wear and tear you would expect to find on a 20-whatever-year-old professional football athlete. And some of that playing into him, being able to bounce back. Obviously, medically things have advanced, and as a PT, the way that you rehab those things have advanced. We've gotten smarter at that. But a good question came in from the FF Sandman. That's Britt on Twitter. Great follow. Go follow him. But what is the new ACL of this generation for NFL injuries? Like, is there something that was detrimental just 20 years ago? Is that like Achilles tear maybe, or is there something else that comes to mind for you?
Oh, see, I read that and went a different way of thinking frequency of how often, because you look at each year and it's like this flurry of a different injury happens each year. Last year, like hamstrings was big. 2-3 years ago, still is to a certain degree. Turf toe, and then high ankle sprains. Those have been happening like crazy. Very high frequency. Yeah, that's a really good question that I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah,
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so from the frequency side, like any thoughts on that, the way you were thinking about it then?
Yeah, well, not really. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's good. I'll move on to some other players because I think that's, people really are interested in the players that they have on their dynasty teams. They want to know that like those, the players that they have are going to come back, and they're going to be like, we assume they're going to come back and be exactly who they were before. Another ACL tear is Courtland Sutton, but a lot more time to come back than even some of these other ones, because that was training camp last year. So he's going to be over a year before he steps back on the field, right? Post-op?
Just under a year.
Just under, okay.
Just under a year, because it was week 2, I believe. For whatever reason, I have like September 20th in my mind. No, that was Saquon's.
I think it was training camp. I think it was before the season started at all. But anyway, what have you heard about Courtland Sutton? I know he was in your article as well.
Yeah, he's just over 7 months out from surgery. And I saw him with his recurvatum stabilization brace, basically your return to sport brace. And ideally, at that stage, it's likely just to get him acclimated to cutting and change direction. At that stage, I would prefer to get an athlete away from that brace sooner. But there's likely some apprehension. There's likely some lack of confidence there. I just hope it's nothing that turns into like a Kerryon Johnson perspective or issue long term, where Kerryon Johnson he still wears his brace. He shouldn't even need it at this point. Yeah,
so why is that? What happened there?
Honestly, most likely lack of confidence in his knee. And you see it in his play style, where there's a lot more hesitation in his game. He doesn't cut as quickly as he used to. There's what's not talked a lot about with injuries is the psychology behind it, especially the psychology of returning to sport, going back to certain movements that led to your injury. So that's what I would like to see over these next. Again, it's May, so he has plenty of time. And I'm willing to bet we see a picture of him or a video of him running routes in July, and he doesn't have the brace on. Right? He's closer to 9 months, 10 months out. So from an injury standpoint, I'm not necessarily concerned about him. The injury, the ACL re-injury risk is a little higher within the first year of being back. It reduces once you get 2 years out. But I think I'm more concerned about who's going to play quarterback than his injury.
Well, yeah, as we all should be, right? I mean, we've got Drew Lock, we got Teddy Bridgewater, and maybe a trade for Aaron Rodgers. Yeah,
maybe.
Jake jumps in. He's a Bengals fan. Thanks for the content, fellas. Out here giving hope to Bengals fans who were crushed when Burrow went down. Hooday! Yeah. Look, I became a Bengals fan when Burrow was drafted by the Bengals. It's funny how I feel like I can have an AFC team and an NFC team. I can still root for my Saints and still, hope the Bengals do well. Don't have to play them very often, obviously, but I hope Burrow does well. And now that he's got Jamar Chase, even better. Really good question come in here. So we'll just bounce away from the injuries momentarily here. But Jake asked us, Jake Kuhn, maybe the running back from the Packers? Wasn't that his
fullback?
Name? Yeah, fullback.
Was that John Kuhn?
John Kuhn. There it is. Yeah. So John's brother Jake asked us, what running back do you think Travis Etienne and James Robinson could be bundled for? So sounds like Jake has Etienne and Robinson on his team, and he wants to bundle them and ship them elsewhere. How high should he be aiming?
I mean, when it comes to trades, If you haven't had any discussions with the other manager yet, I mean, aim high, first off, because you never know. Some people make really bad decisions, and you might get lucky. I don't know. Who would you pair him with around the tier? Who would you want?
I guess the question is how much standalone value is James Robinson going to have, right? Because, if everybody's comparing it to Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, and if so, that's great. Both those guys had that kind of, had a lot of success, and Drew Brees did in the midst of it as well. But that's a lot to ask for, Trevor Lawrence, and you got all the different weapons that they've got there, and Urban Meyer and Darrell Bevel, who we haven't seen be able to, command an offense that's got that many weapons that you're excited about. So, I don't know. Travis Etienne, this is, I know, somebody that you think a lot about and you have some opinions about. You don't really even think that he is necessarily as good as a lot of people think, though, right?
Correct.
So trying to fill that Kamara role, you don't even think he's even going to be.
I don't think
we've seen Kamara.
I don't think the Alvin Kamara comps are even fair, because Kamara, I mean, his lateral agility, his ability to change direction. Watch Etienne play. It's almost like it's not even controlled chaos. He just runs really fast, and then he struggles to slow down, which affects his change of direction ability. And then he puts himself in a position. So I'm actually, I'll take some heat on this one. I don't care, but I'm fading Etienne in this class for both Najee and Javonte Williams. I have both of them ahead. And I'll post this because this will be my very first flag planted for injury, strictly injury concern. Not necessarily talent, but strictly injury concern. I have injury concerns regarding Etienne for his hamstrings and low back moving into the NFL.
Really? Is that based on college, or what's that?
Based on college, how many soft tissue injuries he's had. It's a risky move because it hasn't costed him any games. He's left a couple games early. Barely anyone has it even documented. I just happen to be watching a lot of Clemson. He's left a lot of games early. He's constantly had trainers working on him. He puts himself, because he has difficulty slowing down, he puts himself in a position where he has to make he spin moves way too many times, and then these defenders just drill him right in the back. I mean, that's going to cost him in the NFL if he continues to play that way.
Interesting. So you just happened to be watching these games and something went off in your mind, ooh, I don't like that he's getting over there. He's getting worked on. And even like the way he runs, like his running style, you even know. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I don't think I've mentioned that in a while. I just don't like the way he runs. It's sluggish. He wastes a lot of energy. It's wasteful movement. I don't know. I'm planting my flag on that one. I could very well be wrong, but
that
just my opinion.
Yeah, that is interesting because I mean there's people talking about him like he's the best running back in the class. Obviously, he goes in and gets reunited with his college quarterback. That people are excited about that. But wow, that's something to think about right there. I'll be curious to hear, like you said you're going to tweet this out and do plant your flag on that. That'll be interesting to see what kind of reaction you get because people don't like it when you talk about their favorite players, Jeff. I don't know if you've heard this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll lose some followers. It's fine.
So there's another prospect or rookie who I know you looked a lot into coming out of LSU that rejoined his old it wasn't offensive coordinator, but a passing game coordinator at LSU, offensive coordinator now in Carolina, who must feel pretty good about his injury history, but you aren't quite sure, right? Like that foot kind of worries you.
Teams. So reports came out, I think right before, I can't remember how long, but right before the draft where teams were starting to become concerned with his medicals. And then I found out after the fact that he actually had surgery back in January. He had a scope on his knee. So that's even unrelated to, he had in 2017, he had the Waddle type injury, the ankle dislocation, fibular head fracture. He had, which I think that portion is fine. I think he's shown that he can move beyond that. The one thing I need to look more into for him is biomechanics, how he's moving. Just from a standpoint of, he then fractured his right foot. So I want to go back and see if I can find some of his games from 2017, compare to later on, and see if he was moving differently that led to that injury. But yeah, I mean, I put out a post where I'm slightly concerned about his medical history, but not enough unless the NFL draft, unless NFL teams are fading him. If he starts falling far enough in the draft, we have to listen to that, right? Teams must have found something that we don't know. We only get so much information.
Yeah. So I'm going to move to a couple of different topics here. But if you're listening to this and you have other questions about specific players that you want to hear Jeff's opinion on and hear him talk about their injury and what he expects out of them, then go ahead and ask those away. Fire those off in the chat. I want to ask you a little bit about Nico Collins because I saw that you had an article that you just wrote on dynastyleaguefootball.com about him. And you don't have to give away everything that you have in the article. But, this is a guy that next year, I don't think he'll ever play with Deshaun Watson, but the year after, he could be playing with some really good college quarterbacks because I kind of expect Houston to have the number 1 overall pick next year. They're certainly the early favorites. So he could be playing with a really good quarterback and now have a year under his belt and be ready to rock and roll. And he's going in, the 3rd round right now in a lot of drafts, into the 2nd. So tell me a little bit about what you found when you were looking into Nico Collins.
I love Nico Collins. Maybe an irrational love. Actually, the first person he was completely off my radar, and then the first person to get me on Nico was Fusu. He, to me, I think I posted it a while back. He profiles similarly for me to Kenny Golladay. And again, I try to stay to my niche, just injuries. I'm not a film grinder. There's only like 3 film grinders I trust. And I don't have an analytics model or anything like that. But yeah, he profiles very similarly, in my opinion, to Kenny Golladay. He can win similarly. He's actually a little more explosive. And he's cheap. He's going, according to DLF's ADP, he's going after Amari Rodgers, sometimes after Dwayne Eskridge. People are scared of his landing spot because Deshaun Watson's not going to be there.
Right. And
so I
love
love your
they don't
point.
trust Tyrod Taylor. I don't really understand what that's about.
Well, yeah. Or Davis Mills or whoever.
Yeah.
But I love your
Could be
point.
Davis Mills.
They probably will have 101 next year. That's
Yeah.
Spencer Rattler. That's, I don't know, Malik Willis. Like, I don't know who that is, but he will likely have a stud quarterback eventually, and he profiles like a true alpha in an offense, you know.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean he goes in the third round of the draft. He goes to Houston, and you know he's not a guy that I guess you would typically think of like here's the profile of somebody who you're going to get really excited about going in third rounds now. But I mean, how many times does this happen, right? Like every year there's somebody that's we're taking way later than we should. We haven't thought through or looked at him as much or heard as much buzz. And yeah, I really like that call. Who else? Like, who else have you been kind of looking into, getting excited about? Like, what other players get you excited right now this time of year?
Well, I have to mention Jared Dokes. That's my. I have a little fan club. I think that we're all sticking together and rooting for Jared Dokes. Yeah, I love Josh Palmer's upside. I think he's untapped potential. He came out of Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
And he showed some good things in the Senior Bowl. He was drafted a lot higher than anyone expected. Sorry. And I mean, he gets to catch passes from Justin Herbert, who is a lot of people's dynasty quarterback too.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your opinion on him? Do you think he could eventually take over for Mike Williams, who has 1 year left?
He seems to fit the profile of the kind of receivers that they've been taking lately. I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden, but who's the guy that they just took? So he's 6'1", 210, and he reminds me of the guy. Oh man, I'm gonna have to pull up their depth chart. But anyway, they have a type. He's big, strong.
They have Jalen Guyton. They have
yes, that's what I'm thinking of. He reminds me of like that type of. Guyton was on the field a bunch last year and just kind of flew down the field. And Herbert hit him some, and when he did, he had a good game, and when he didn't, he didn't. But he did. Like people don't realize how often he was on the field last year, and if Palmer can be that plus, then he's going to be on the field a lot. It's just a matter of like how much are they going to run plays specifically for him? How much is it just going to be like, does he get open deep a few times a game? Stuff like that. So, but yeah, I love the name of the draft capital. It makes it look like here's a guy that we could invest in and probably do okay with, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking at, like, he may be even a great draft and taxi stash. He probably won't do much year one. Same with Cornell Powell and Jalen Camp. Camp's more of an athletic freak, but Powell, honestly, I could see him groomed into being their wide receiver 2 opposite Tyreek by wishful thinking midseason, but probably next year.
Yeah, probably next year after Julio Jones gets traded again away from KC. Let's talk about somebody that I think actually should be in the market for Julio Jones, and that's your San Francisco 49ers. And I know there's a lot of like talk about like there's a connection to Kyle Shanahan and all that, but the thing I'm really interested in hearing about is you're starting to sound like on Twitter you're talking yourself into Trey Sermon. What are you expecting out of the running back quote unquote committee? Whatever they have going on back there in the backfield in San Fran.
Now I need clarification on that because I had Trey Sermon. I had Trey Sermon as my running back 4, and there were 4 running backs in this draft class who could potentially be not necessarily a workhorse, but lead backs. I love Sermon, so I've kind of been wherever he went. I thought he would go to Atlanta. I thought he would go to maybe Pittsburgh if they didn't grab Najee. So to have the Niners draft him. I'm kind of curious, it'll likely stick as a committee this year just because Shanahan doesn't necessarily trust rookies, especially right off the bat. They're on the verge of this Super Bowl run, like getting back to it again. So I don't see him cutting or moving away from Raheem Mostert. But again, they could deal with injuries. So I'm in on Trey Sermon. I'm not in on Trey Sermon at 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, but maybe like back half, maybe 1.11, 12 at most. Still somewhat uncomfortable because you're passing up on some really good wide receivers.
Yeah.
I'm team no quarterback in first round, but yeah.
Right. Especially in one quarterback, right? Top half of the second is where I've been seeing him go a lot of times in the in Superflex, because it's like the overreaction. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, Trey Sermon can't. But I'm like, do you know how crazy you would have sounded if you said like, hey, Raheem Mostert is going to have dynasty value, or that like Jeff Wilson is good? Like, those guys didn't come into the league as we were thinking near as highly of them as we think about Trey Sermon.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's the scheme. He can Shannon. Now, obviously, you have to perform with those opportunities. Cal, you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry, you froze on my screen. Yeah, he like Joe Williams. Everyone points to the Niners traded up for Joe Williams in 2017, and he was a bust. He didn't even play a snap in the NFL. Niners traded up for Trey Sermon. It's going to be the same deal. Just not totally different players altogether. So
yeah,
I'm not personally concerned about Trey Sermon.
What about the quarterback position? Who's going to be quarterback for the 49ers in week 1?
Jimmy G. As much as I'm tired of him, yeah, he's. It's really hard to ask a rookie quarterback to step in and lead your team to the Super Bowl. And again, they're right there. So yeah, it won't be Trey Lance. Maybe if Jimmy G gets hurt or if he's struggling through 6-7 games, maybe Shanahan feels comfortable to throw Lance in there. But
yeah, I'd be curious to see how long that lasts, because first of all, it's not like Jimmy Garoppolo has a sterling injury background, right? Bringing it back to the the injury topic here, like is that really what happened in San Fran? I mean, ultimately, it's just hard to trust how much availability he had. He did bring this team to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I mean,
well, yeah. Okay, so you can argue though that his play almost costed us a trip to the Super Bowl. First off, by closing his eyes and throwing interceptions, and he was somewhat carried by the run game and literally an elite defense that will never be replicated. Same thing could be said for what was it, the Steelers that one year, where their defense was just like, it's so hard to replicate those amazing defensive years. The fall off year to year is astronomical. So to think that their defense is going to play that good is unlikely. But I mean, Shanahan straight up said, he's been injured. We told him that, we don't trust your health long term. Like, we have to go get our guy. I just, part of me though, you look at actions. I mean, Shanahan took the ball out of Jimmy G's hands so many times in the playoffs and just ran it. He ran it, like 15 times in a row?
Yes. I think they threw the ball 9 times in that NFC Championship game. So,
yeah. If you trust your quarterback, you're throwing it more than that.
Right. Your other favorite person that I see you talk about on Twitter all the time is Brandon Aiyuk. And we're, sticking with the 49ers theme here. But Brandon Aiyuk is coming in right now on ADP as the wide receiver 17. Okay, he's going behind Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Michael Thomas. Good wide receivers there. Any among those group that you're taking Aiyuk over?
Ooh. Well, let me pull this up. I hate you for putting me in this position.
That's what I'm here for. All right, so Brandon Aiyuk or Amari Cooper?
Well, I think I would still go Aiyuk in that position. But I've been an irrational, never Amari Cooper person. Those players that you always have a couple players who just they'll never be on my team. Cooper's one of them. I'm not necessarily because I'm concerned about his injury history. I just gosh, they pass so much though. They'll probably move on from Gallup. CD will likely become number 1 in that offense, but number 2 in that offense still carries an astronomical volume. I'll stick with my guy, Aiyuk.
Yeah, that's you gotta be the Aiyuk guy, man. You gotta come in like strong on some of those. Like, no, it's Brandon Aiyuk. He's the number 1 guy. I don't know how high you have him, but like you might as well just go all in at this point. Like, yeah.
Well, and Lance can seriously unlock his full potential. I mean, you have Kyle Shanahan, one of the best offensive minds in the game, calling him the next Isaac Bruce. Like, you have to think that he's going to open up his offense. You know, obviously as a Niner fan, I've been watching all these games, and it just seems like, even when moving to Nick Mullins, it seems like when Jimmy G's in the game, the offense is somewhat limited, right? And so now he has a guy who he can scramble the RPOs. I mean, it's going to be dangerous there, dangerous risk, holding defenses. Lance will be able to stretch the field vertically. It just unlocks Aiyuk, I think, his full potential.
Question from Matt. I stepped on a Lego last week. When can I get back to work?
Today, what are you in, a union?
Yeah. Also, he never listens to his own advice. Good old Matt. Appreciate you tuning in. And yeah, like that's your best advice you've given right there, Matt. Never listen to my own advice. So, Jeff, I'm excited that we get a chance to work together here at DLF. We've spent a lot of time, before you accidentally wandered into a live stream with me and Matt, and it's been awesome. It's great to see you grow, and the way you've, made a name for yourself in the community is really awesome. Anybody out there that's watching this, where can they find you, and how can they support what you're doing?
Yeah, you can find me, my handles right there at JMThrivePT. If you don't have a DLF subscription, I honestly recommend it to the highest. There's so many tools on there that you can use. All these analysts on here, I mean, they're coming up with some amazing content. Also, not just for this year, redraft, dynasty, but also Devy too. Yeah, you need to get in here. Plus all the injury info. Any of my articles will be in there. And then tune in, obviously, to the DLF show. You guys I know it's weekly, but you guys are doing multiple. How many per week?
So I'm doing some of these where, if I for instance, injuries is an important part of Dynasty. Thinking about do I want to invest in George Kittle or, any of the guys that we talked about here? As someone who has no experience with injuries, or PT or coming back from injuries, whatever it is, I just think he's gotten hurt a lot. And so being able to hear from someone like you that can talk through some of those injuries, Saquon and, the other guys that we talked about here, Joe Burrow, and Jeff with his Jeff Bell with Devy, wanting to have him on. I had the Dynasty Trade Machine guys, plus Dynasty Outhouse, on last week to talk about trades and just trading philosophies and things like that. So some of these are kind of one-off, just what I think would be of value to the community. The one that me and Tyler are doing, Tyler Karp, is going to be every Tuesday at 7:30. And that's going to be it's just ask us anything. It's, we've already got a bunch of questions in from Twitter that we're going to go over, but just the same kind of thing where the questions come in here on the live comments. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to provide an outlet, a place where people can, come to, ask those questions, get them answered, get those just live responses, just the real reactions. It's good on Twitter as well, but sometimes hearing the thought and the seeing the way it is for you trying to think through Amari Cooper or Brandon Aiyuk, watching you sort of painfully go through that's valuable. You probably would have done that and then on Twitter just said Aiyuk, but seeing that reaction can be, you can learn from that. It's close, in other words. So, yeah, that's what we're doing, and I appreciate you mentioning it. Hopefully, anybody watching this, make sure you tune into that because it's gonna be a really good show. You're going to get the answers that you're looking for, and and think through the thought process as well. So, if you're watching this right now, right down below. Make sure that you are subscribed. Hit that subscribe button, the notification button, turn that on as well, because we are going live with opportunities to get in and get some questions answered from people who really know what they're talking about. Like you said, like you really are really good with this injury stuff. We've got people that are really good at other things that are coming on. I got some other ideas that we're going to get people in and talk about, like dynasty strategy and other stuff. We're trying to confirm all that. People who are really, 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 really good at it, by the way. Like this, it's going to be awesome. So, but yeah, make sure you do that. Like this video, comment down below. Like if you have anything else, find Jeff on Twitter, and he's always very interactive. Make sure that you are reading his threads and paying attention to the work that he's doing. As he said, make sure that you are subscribing to dynastyleaguefootball.com as well. I've been blown away with just the tools and the different things that are on the site and the content that's on there. Like, it's DLF's been around for a long time, but I just don't know that the site has ever been better than it is right now. There's so many good things, so many good people working on it. Addison, who any viewer of this YouTube channel will know Addison well. He does amazing job with a lot of the tools and a lot of the back end stuff that people probably don't even know that he does, but he's just a super talented guy. So for Jeff, for DLF, I am Cal, and we will see you.